Yo, hey, what's up? I'm just checking the stream here to see if this actually works. I'm Jace, and I got Devin here with me.
Hey guys.
I'm a game dev here in Edmonton, not Calgary, unfortunately. And I run a company called Schadenfreude, and I'm working on a game called Little Hellions. You may have heard about it. You probably haven't. And Devin, here's my publisher. He's from Violet Games, and today we're gonna basically go through like a little crash course of like what making a game is like. I'll show you the guts of Little Hellions. I'll show you the game itself just so you can get a sense of how it works, and yeah, we'll just see how it goes. We'll add some new features to the game. If you've played the game at a previous Salt Flats Mines events, you'll actually maybe see some new stuff, which is kind of cool. And yeah, so Devin is just going to be watching the chat for me, and if you guys have any questions, we will be stopping maybe 3 times throughout the stream to answer those questions. So don't worry, we will answer questions. We'll just like find a good spot to do that, and then we'll answer those questions. So first we'll start with just showing you guys the game. I guess I'll just run it. So if you haven't heard about Little Hellions, I've been working on it for the last eternity. I started it in 2015, and it's a competitive fighting game where you can't actually fight at all. So what does that mean? Well, let me just get some players in here. So it's up to 4 players. So we'll just get everybody in here. Unfortunately, I don't have any other players here with me, so I'm legit just doing this all by myself with 4 controllers. So how the game works, once I got all the players in here, is you'll notice we have 4 player characters. And like I said, you can't actually attack in this game, but it is a competitive game. So you'll notice those like little colored icons above the characters. I'm controlling the red one right now. That's Lucy. And those colored pips represent the other players. Everything's color coded. So the blue pip represents the blue player, the yellow pip, the yellow player, etc. So those pips line up with your controller buttons, and if I were to say hold the button that represents the blue player, I can charge up for blue, and when I let go, I'll switch locations with the blue player. Now, the point of that is you want to trade locations with somebody at a moment that would be really inconvenient for them, and that's how you actually win matches, is you're like switching with characters into all these different death traps that are around the levels. So as a quick, for instance, I will just jump into a versus match just to show you, give you a sense of what that looks like. Let's go to Slam Jammers. Okay. All right. So on this level, the traps are these basketball hoops, and they explode when you fall in them. So your goal then would be to charge up to switch, and then you switch right before you hit the hoop, and hopefully, there you go, you can drop somebody into the hoop. There's a bunch of other rules. It's not really worth getting in for this stream, just because we're not really going to go into the mechanics of the game super deep. There's a couple defensive things you can do. You have a shield that blocks people from switching with you. You can slow people down by jumping on their head. There's a bunch of like little nuances to how the switch actually works. If you're moving when you switch, you'll like throw your opponent in a direction, which is kind of the point of this level, because you can kind of like trick shot people into the hoops. I'm actually not very good at that. Devin's pretty great at it, to my chagrin.
We've played a bunch, so yeah.
Yeah. So, that's basically how the game works. So I will just finish up this round really, really quick, and then I can talk about what we'll actually be adding over the next 30 minutes to an hour. So if you look at this background, this is kind of like the main area in the game. This is Schadenfreude. It's like the underworld city that the game takes place in. And in the final game, there'll be 4 different worlds that you can go to, and you can travel through them through the co-op mode. Yes, there's also a co-op mode. And you can compete in them in the versus areas or whatever. So right now, there's 2 worlds in the game. Like I said, the game is still in development, so we're still adding these things. So let's take a look at the other background. I'll just lower the amount of rounds in this. So yeah, Schadenfreude is the main kind of world area. It's like a big bustling underworld city. This is Dreadnoodle, which is the 4th world, and it's kind of like a Lovecraftian under the sea ramen restaurant / nightclub. It's a lot. And so everything in this world will have different traps that you interact with. Like on this level, you got these weird elevators that shoot you into the air, and then you got this spiky thing on the ceiling. So this level is pretty complicated because you can like shoot other players around, and you can also crush them with the lifts. Unfortunately, since it's just me playing, you can't get the full experience, but I'm sure you can imagine that like this game can get really chaotic really fast because of everybody is trading places with each other constantly, right? It's like kind of a sensory overload by design, and it's a lot of fun, not to toot my own horn. So let's actually add something though. So what I think we're gonna do is I'll give you guys a quick tour of Game Maker Studio 2. That's the engine I actually use to make the game. So you have like a very high level understanding of like what you even do to start making a game, and then I'll actually step by step go through how I would add the artwork for a new world. And again, if you haven't actually played Little Hellions, if you have played Little Hellions at one of our demo events, this is actually a new world you haven't seen before too, so that's kind of cool. Before I get to explaining Game Maker Studio 2 though, we might just take a quick question break just for anything that's come up about how the game works. So Devin, do you got any questions yet, or do you want to just move on forward?
So Sellercast says this should be in a future AESA event, and so I guess it kind of has. We've been in other, salt mines tournaments and all that too, and we'll probably have more. Broken Echo says, on that, how do you manage the chaos from a visual perspective to still keep the players able to see what's going on?
That's a really good question. I should have kept the game up for this, but there's a couple ways to do it. One, on a certain level, the game is chaotic by nature. So at a certain point, it is going to be hard to follow, and that's kind of built in. Now, I know that sounds like a cop-out answer. So, like, yes, there are a bunch of things that are in there that are meant to actually, make the game readable, though, right? The first thing is the color coding, right? Actually, you know what? I am going to bring the game back question because that's a really good question. So every character is color coded, and that is pretty integral to being able to track the characters. Like if you're the red player, then you got to keep aware for whenever you see red on the screen, because that means someone's getting red, preparing to switch with you. That's actually why the switch mechanic charges up as opposed to is instantaneous, because then the game can tell you before something happens that it's going to happen. I do understand. Unfortunately, again, this game is still in development, so there is a couple things that I would like to implement in terms of readability that aren't in there. I do totally understand that, we will have colorblind players as well. So I am going to add symbols for all of the colors as well. So it'd be colors and symbols to convey that information. But yeah, for the most part, it's colors and symbols and like really big graphics, like the big magic sigil there, to kind of convey who's going to do what before it actually occurs. That's kind of the main way we convey what's going on in the game.
Jace,
do you have any more questions, Devin?
Well, you kind of answered one. So Lola AF Cosplay, she said, with so many elements being so color-coded, any options, thoughts on colorblind modes?
Yeah,
sorry for saying a gender there. I didn't mean to say that.
Yeah, so actually, to speak further to that, just because, we have another question about it, the actual symbols that we'll be using is card houses, just because that's something that everybody understands, and it actually kind of works pretty well with the kind of like I don't know, City of Sin kind of vibe that Schadenfreude has. So like player 1 would be hearts, player 2 would be I guess like spades, yeah. Player 3 would be clubs, and player 4 would be diamonds. The reason I'm specific about that is because you can actually associate like number of shapes with the card houses. So for instance, a spade has 3 circles on it, so that would be player 3. A diamond has 4 corners, so that would be player 4, etc. You really want to work hard on conveying information subliminally when you're working on stuff like this, because it happens so fast that your brain kind of has to use prior knowledge it already has to make sense of what it's looking at. So that's our current solution for that. But we're definitely taking player input on that, because like, again, the game goes so fast. It's very fast. And I really want anybody to be able to play the game. I want anybody to be able to enjoy it if they want to, and if they feel like it's the kind of game they would enjoy, regardless of, any of their current situation. So yeah, I think we'll maybe take one more question and then we'll go on to the actual.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have a tough time pronouncing this. Lucid says, what did you guys use for your networking?
Networking. Well, that's an easy question to answer. We used nothing. Currently, the game, it doesn't run online. The game probably on launch will be like couch multiplayer only. We're definitely thinking about online because everybody wants it, of course. And up until, the Backstreet Boys reunion tour, we haven't really needed online, but now that everybody has to do everything online and on the internet, we're kind of reconsidering it. So at the tough answer to that is that like the whole game isn't really built for online currently. You really have to start from the ground up knowing you're going to do that, because the internals of the game have to be prepared for that. I am looking into services for that turn couch co-op games into online games. They're actually quite good these days for those kind of games, I've found. So we might try to maybe partner with one of them, or at the very least find one that works really good for Hellions and then recommend that. So that's what we'll do at the very least. But I don't want to make any promises. If the game absolutely explodes and does really well, we could go back in and add online multiplayer, but that's not something I'm currently preparing to do because I just don't know how well the game will do in the end. So unfortunately, that's the best answer I got for that. All right. Let's get to GameMaker. So, GameMaker Studio 2. This is the program that I use to make Little Hellions. Actually, I've been using GameMaker since it was GameMaker 5. Didn't even have the studio part. That was a while ago. I was a small child. And yeah, the thing about GameMaker is I would not necessarily recommend GameMaker for like, hey, I'm a kid and I want to learn how to make games and I've never interacted with code. I don't know anything about like coding logic. And I don't have anybody to ask questions. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for that. If you are completely starting from square one, I would actually recommend something like Scratch, something very visual. But if you have had a very cursory glance at like game development on some level, so you understand like, okay, I have to make art and then plug in that art into some sort of object with some sort of logic in it, regardless of whether that's actual code or like logic blocks or whatever. I actually think GameMaker is really good. GameMaker is really user friendly, and it also is really just easy to organize a project with. It's very fast as well. You can build something in GameMaker in a night to prototype something very, very quickly. It's just once you start building out your project, that's probably when GameMaker will start having difficulties organizing a really huge project, which is what I'm doing. So, you know, you make your bed and you lay in it, right? So let's go through the tour of GameMaker itself. So as you can see in this big blank space here, this is your workspace. This is where you'll actually be, making stuff. And over here are your resources, which is the stuff you've made. So if you think about it in a really zoomed out sense, a game is just you working on stuff, and then once you've made enough stuff, that stuff will start interacting, and that's like the game happening. So there's a bunch of different types of resources, and they all interact in different ways and can be used by each other to make the game happen. So the first, or there's a bunch, but we'll just go through the ones that are like, the ones you'll usually use. So the most straightforward one are sprites. So sprites is just like a name for artwork in the game. The difference between like a large piece of art and a sprite specifically is sprites will be broken down into specific animations. So if we go into Lucy's sprite like library here, we can see that there's her idle animation. So this is what she looks like when she's just standing in place. She'll have a run animation. So this is her running for when you're moving around. And you'll just have a bunch of these for all sorts of different scenarios. Here's her inside of a bubble, just in case you need that for some reason. You've got like the character's mugshot on the character select screen. you'll just have a lot of different animations for what the character actually does. Sprites can also be something as mundane as like UI elements or parts of menus. So like here's the P1 for saying what your player character's number is and things like that. So your game will probably end up with a lot of sprites if you want your game to be kind of art heavy. Yeah. So after sprites, we got tile sets, which are another form of game artwork. I won't go too far into it just now because I'll explain it a bit more later. But basically, you can create a bunch of art and put it on a grid so that it's easier to place in levels later. So it's kind of like a more technical implementation of artwork. Again, I'll come back to that later. Then you got your sounds. So we got all of our music. We got all of our sound effects, little voice clips of the characters like making grunts and stuff when they get blown up. And then we've got the heart of GameMaker, which is your objects. So objects. Trying to explain this fast is going to be something. Objects are the core of any game, or at least any game that is in a programming language that is object-oriented. So the idea of objects in coding and in GameMaker are that objects... Okay, that's intimidating to just open up, huh? Objects are basically like blocks of information and logic. And you throw a bunch of logic and information into one block, and then that is like a defined thing that does something. It does a specific thing. So as a very high level example, here's one of the most important objects in the game, player, object, player. So this is the object that is the player character. And unfortunately, not unfortunately, I think it's probably this way for most games. The player object is really complicated in Hellions. One, because it's one of the first things I made and I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but also because your player can do a bunch of things. And especially since it's a multiplayer game, there's a lot of things I have to account for to actually, get the players to interact correctly and everything. So again, we won't get too far into it because I'll come back to it later. But if you look inside of an object, you'll have, and this is why GameMaker is so user-friendly, is you'll basically have all these things called events. And events are logic calls of like when a certain thing occurs, do something. They're if statements essentially of like, if the player character is, as a for instance, outside of the room, which is like the play space, then do this code. Or when the player character is created, do all of that. So you kind of like decide what kind of event you want a player to do something, and then you actually put what happens. Now, you might be looking at that and being like, that looks kind of intimidating. You got all of these events, and some of these events have like so much code in there. Like, look at that. What is all that? Well, the thing about it is, when I started using GameMaker, I didn't actually even write code. I didn't even know how to write code. The reason that GameMaker is so handy is because you can actually, instead of writing code, you can basically use logic blocks where you take a block that's like, if, I don't know, if moving, do this, a change animation, you know what I mean? So you're basically stacking these little Legos that will essentially do what you want them to do. The goal being it gets you more to think about the logic behind the code rather than like, how do I write code? How do I do the syntax of code? Because when you're starting out, that's easily the hardest part of being like, as example, like you're looking at this, it's like, okay, this is a for loop. You're like, what the heck is a for loop? What does var I equals 0 semicolon mean? You know, instead, if you're working with logic blocks, it's much more straightforward. It's a little more limited what you can do. That's why I use code, because at a point, you know, once your project gets more complicated, it'll be a little hard to do it with that way. But that's a great way to get started. Anyways, before we get to the end of this section, the last kind of type of resource we'll talk about today is rooms. So rooms, if sprites are the art of the game, sound is the sound of the game, objects are the things that do stuff in the game, then rooms are the setting of the game. They're the actual places you go to in the game. So if you've ever played like Mario, or it's just Mario Brothers? Yeah, the original Mario Brothers. 1-1, the original 1-1 in Mario Brothers. That's one room that you're running the full distance of. So in Little Hellions, I'll just bring up a random level as an example. So in Little Hellions, conveniently, all the rooms are a single screen. You don't actually pan, you don't actually move through the room, and that's just by design. If you think about Super Smash Brothers or Samurai Gun or Towerfall, games like that, they all tend to be these kind of single screen. Maybe they zoom in and out, but for the most part, you're not really moving through an area for the most part. So designing levels in Hellions is a little more straightforward in that sense, because you're just doing the actual, you're just laying down the tiles and then laying down objects, and that's really it. You don't have to worry too much about like you know, moving through a large space or anything like that. So yeah, I think we're going to take another question break here now, just to cover, you know, I just went through a bunch about GameMaker itself. So yeah, Devin, if you got any questions about GameMaker, or, you know, any questions, let's hear them. What do you got?
So Chunky Corey 69 asked a couple. Some of them were answered in the chat there. He says, or they said, time to switch to Godot. And then they asked, I wonder what language this in. That was answered though with GML.
Yes.
So ClockPip says, question for Jace. You mentioned that you didn't use code at first, but what is your background with programming and OOP related items?
Okay. Yeah, so I'm a kind of weird case because I wasn't formally trained for like game programming, and for a long time I wasn't formally trained in programming at all. So I started as like a hobbyist game dev when I was like, you know, in junior high or something, you know, like I just picked up GameMaker 5 and I started messing around with it, and I made all of these absolutely busted, horrible games that I would love to find on a hard drive somewhere and just go through them in a stream or something. I don't think I have them anymore, unfortunately, but I would make fan games and yeah, all sorts of stuff. I think I made a Sonic DDR clone at some point. Yeah, I would just fool around with that, and I would slowly learn just through trying to do things. By the time I got to high school, I started taking up web development type stuff. So I started doing kind of front end HTML, JavaScript, things like that, which was kind of my main introduction to like how to actually understand coding syntax and stuff like that. And once I got to university, I didn't actually take was kind of more of an arts. I'm an illustrator before I'm anything else. So I definitely went kind of more in the art direction. And eventually I did take some coding classes, but it was all for web still, because at the time I thought I was going into web development primarily, like I was web design kind of thing. And that's the bulk of where I learned like kind of better coding practices and like the names for things. If you're starting coding, honestly, the best thing you can do is finding out the name for things you want to do. Because if you can find out the name for something you want to understand, then you can look it up and then you can read about it. For instance, I remember using arrays for a really long time. It's like, oh, it's the thing inside the square brackets. I didn't actually know what it was called though. So I could never look up like, how does an array work? Things like that. What are the characteristics of arrays within GameMaker specifically? I just knew that, like, well, if you put a bracket in GameMaker, it does this thing, So that's integral, is to be able to figure out the names of the things you're working on. Anyways, so yeah, I learned web development and I worked with C++ a little bit for some of that, but mostly Java and stuff like that. I had an office job for a while that was pretty intensive on that. And once I kind of gave that up and started doing game dev full time, that really put that stuff to the test. And I found that, like, yeah, after enough time, as long as you understand the logic behind the basic, understanding logic of code and figuring out how to understand the syntax of code, you can pretty much learn anything with enough time and enough Googling. So that's my long answer to that question. Do we got any other questions, Devin?
Let's do maybe just one more here.
Yeah, that was kind of unnecessarily a long answer, so let's just do one more for now.
Chunky Corey, I'm just gonna respond to your one there. So Chunky Corey 69 says, but what about the co-op levels? There was multiple rooms in there. That's when you were talking about the rooms.
Right. Yes. So if you have played Little Hellions, because I'm not actually going to show co-op today, just because I kind of busted it before the stream, so I can't really show it. But if you have played Little Hellions, you'll know that there are co-op levels, and that in co-op you go from room to room to room, so that you can solve challenges sequentially, right? Because like it's kind of difficult to make a long level in a single tiny room, right? So how co-op levels are managed, and I don't want to get too deep into this because this is a little outside the scope of what we're talking about, but even so, how co-op levels are managed is that they are still just single rooms though. So this is there's a level in our previous demo we did called what was it called? Something about chicken. Dread Noodle's Original Chicken. Yeah, that's what it was. Because you're playing chicken with this big wall that moves towards you and kills you. So each of the levels for Original Chicken are single rooms. They're not attached. You're not like moving from one location to a next. And instead what you do is you enter this door and then it will load a new room. So all the rooms are still isolated, completely separated. It's just in code, they are linked by these door objects that will move you from one room to the next. So that's a really good question. The levels aren't actually connected, but through code you go from one to the next to the next. Yeah. So, all right. Now we get to the fun part where we actually get to make something. So, like I said, there are two worlds currently in Little Hellions. There's Schadenfreude, the underworld city, and Dread Noodle, the undersea I gotta find a faster way of saying this. Ramen restaurant nightclub. So, what's the next world we're gonna add? Okay, well, you gotta keep in mind that this stuff doesn't just come out of nowhere. You actually have to come up with an idea first, right? Like before you even get to making anything, you got to think about what the heck you're making. So, I, thankfully for me, am cursed with having too many ideas and not enough time to actually put them in the game. So I, for the most part, knew generally what I wanted the 4 worlds to be, but taking that out of your head and actually making it is a whole process in itself. So what we started with, now I say we because I do mostly everything in the game, but this is actually one of the small parts where I actually have someone helping me. All the new backgrounds we're making, I have a guy who I've been working with who takes a lot of my concepts and actually puts together the art for the backgrounds. I could do them, but it's just one of those things where it's like they take so long to do, and there's so many things that needs to be done in the game. My time is better suited building the game and just having him working on that stuff in the background. So his name's Ray. He's not on the call. He probably can't be. He lives halfway across the earth, so he wouldn't be able to be on the line even if he wanted to. What will happen is I'll come up with a concept, introduce kind of like what I'm thinking of a world, and then I'll run it through Ray, and then he'll start producing concept art, and I'll kind of guide him to where we want to go, and then we'll start actually making actual art that you can implement into the game. So the world that we'll be going through what is called the Boneyard, and the idea with the Boneyard is I kind of wanted like heavy metal industrial center scrapyard, except instead of like machines and like broken up cars and stuff, it's all bones, being like, oh, if this is the underworld, then like where does all of the like cosmic refuse of the universe go due to like entropy and weird dark magic or whatever. So it's like, oh well, it goes into this big grinder machine at the bottom of the universe. So we started fleshing out this idea of the Boneyard. So I'll show you guys some concept art for that. The first thing we wanted to do is just figure out basic forms. Like, what kind of shapes are you going to see in this level? What kind of like patterns and stuff are you going to see in this level? So this is just some pipes, just some like nondescript machinery. And then we started wanting to narrow down to like, okay, what are like set pieces that you'll be able to see in the background and immediately recognize, where if you saw this art outside of the game, you'd be like, oh, that's from Little Hellions. So I got this idea for this like central turbine thing. That's kind of like the main thing you're looking at in the background. And so that would be in the center of the background. And then there's like this big machine on top of it that runs the turbine. And then the turbine is like grinding up all of these bones in the center of the pit. So we started working on the actual design for the turbine itself. So this is the upper half above the turbine, which is like this like, big intimidating skull machine thing. And it's got horns on top because of course it's got horns. Pro tip, every character in Little Hellions has horns. If you just pay attention, they all do. Even if it looks like they don't, they do somewhere on their person. And we're like, okay, so we're narrowing down our way to the design of the turbine. Okay, what does the bone pit look like? So we start working with some really early looks at like, just getting a feel for how we want the bones to look. So for instance, this is a perfectly fine sketch, but one thing I found with this sketch was there's lots of rocks, and I was like, no, I just want these mounds of bones, like endless piles of bones, like way more bones than there ever could be. So like we moved on from that to like something more like this, where it's just like these, incomprehensible piles of bones and decay. And then, of course, one thing that started coming up is Little Hellions is ultimately a really cute game. The kind of the fun of Hellions is that it's got kind of like a masochistic theme to it of like subjecting your friends to violence, but it's all in goodwill, right? Like of the lore and the writing of all of Hellions is like, yes, in the underworld people like torment each other, but like that's normal and that's just how people express like camaraderie to each other. So it's this weird kind of like opposing whatever. So I wanted to convey that with these bone piles. They're a little bit too like scary, for lack of a better term. So Ray actually came up with this really great idea of like, oh, what if all the bones have these like cute sleepy eyes? What if they're all like just, they're just having a nice little nap? And I loved that. I thought that was great. So actually this like Triceratops looking guy, I really liked him. So he actually made his way into the final design. Yeah, so we'll get to see that in a minute here. I'll just close all these. But I'll show you two more things, or three more things. So after we went through all the concept work, I went and I made like an early mock-up of kind of like what I was thinking based off of all the work he did. So here's kind of like a general layout of the background. You got Sin R, that's what we ended up calling the big machine. It's like the artificial intelligence that runs all of the like civil services of the underworld and is powered by the turbine at the bottom of the universe. And so you got Sin R in the center here. You got the big turbine. You got the bone pits. You got these kind of bone piles in the foreground. And then you kind of have these like scaffolding areas that are kind of supposed to be like rooftop parties, I guess, because like people still live down here. And then you got this big kind of donut thing going around the whole pit, which is Torment Labs, which is like the company, I guess, that makes all the torment devices and torture devices in the underworld and kind of like tests new ways of tormenting people. And then on the far right, you have this grinder thing just to kind of add some more kind of visual diversity and not make the background totally symmetrical. So at that point, this is when Ray starts making actual assets that we'll use in the game. So here's a fun one I caught from our conversations. When he went to go animate the turbine, it's actually really difficult to animate something that rigid and, it's like a cylinder with spikes on it. It's really hard to animate that by hand, right? So what he did instead is he made a 3D model, and then we run this model through a bunch of filters that will make it look like sprite art, and then we'll clean that up, and then we'll put that in the game. So this is actually a method that's used in a lot of 2D games. You'd be surprised how many 3D models are made for 2D projects, which is kind of wild. And then something super fun, I'm sure you might appreciate this. I thought this was amazing. He did this without even telling me. The turbine in the center, it's like these two like cone things grinding against each other. That's kind of difficult to animate as well. So instead of making a 3D model, he actually made these paper like origami cups, and he actually took video of them turning, and then he rotoscoped them, which is like drawing over the models. And I just thought that was so clever and awesome, and it gives it such a more realistic look to how it moves and stuff. It's really wild. So How are we doing for time, Devin?
You got 5 minutes.
What? Okay. All right. That's okay. I can show the rest pretty quick here. So, um, this is where we actually ended up with the background once we got all of the art made. So you can see everything I just talked about. I'm not going to hang on this for too long, but we really put a lot of effort into getting all of the sprite work in place. And here's our little Triceratops guy and like the party platforms or whatever you want to call them, the big grinder thing. Okay, now we need to put this in the game in less than 5 minutes. Dang, how do you do that? Well, you got to break up all of the art into a bunch of pieces and then put those in the game. You could just put this flat image into the game, but the thing about that is it'll be flat and it will animate and you can't add depth. So I like breaking up the images so I can add like particle effects and animate the individual layers and so on and just really make it come to life. So let's add this really quick. So if I show you over here, here are all our cut up pieces for the background. Just a bunch of stuff, a bunch of little things. These are all just like tiny little animations and stuff. Here's our tile set we'll use to actually make levels, like the level geometry. And now we got to put that in. So we import all of that into the game. Where do I keep that? Tile sets, boneyard. So we import this into the game. Here's like the bone pile. You got to give them like a uniform name so you can like organize your project. So for instance, all the backgrounds start with B in my project, and then they have a short little code for like what world they belong to. So BON for boneyard, and then bones being the pile of bones, or the grinder object. It's like bbon grinder, and then that has its own animation to it. And yeah, so we end up with a bunch of different assets we import into the game. Then we make the tile set. I kind of glazed over this because we're running out of time, but like I said before, a tile set is a bunch of art organized on a grid so that it can be added, so that the game can actually generate how those tiles interact with each other. So you can almost like draw the level geometry. I'll show that in a minute. And then we go to actually add it to a level. So let's go do that. If I just move this up here. So here's our empty room. You can see there's nothing in here. There's this white box. That's our camera. So everything outside of the box, you can't actually see when you play the game. That's like the out of bounds area. And it's just good to have that. You can put things off screen and stuff. So we'll start putting the art actually into the level now. So you can see all these layers on the left here. I kind of did some of this ahead of time just to, make this run smoother. So this will be the furthest most back in our background. You'll see there's a bunch of stuff that's like, it doesn't look like that in the main game. It's like, well, yeah, a lot of this stuff gets overlaid by other layers. So it's kind of like, it doesn't really matter that it's there. But the point of this layer is all those pipes in the back, you can see. So we'll put that. And then if I hit play here, we can actually see animations in real time. So we can add our elevator animations, which are like these elevators that lower down into the underworld. So we can add that animation. Then we can add the actual pit. You can see, like I said, it overlays this kind of these purple spikes. So, hide that. We'll just keep adding all the different layers into the game. Ooh, wow, that's flickery. There we go. There's the turbine animated. Keep adding stuff. There's the grinder on the right there. And then the bones on the foreground. And then if we actually wanted to add tiles, as in level geometry, we could go to our auto tiler and I could actually draw these tiles. So unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of time to go through how this works, but the idea here is like you can draw the art anywhere, and then depending on how they touch each other, it'll actually figure out via game logic how to actually build that geometry in a way that looks okay. So we got that set up. And then we're just going to run the game really quick to see what this looks like. We're just about done here. So we'll take some questions after this and what next step. Come on, there we go. So now you can see the level running. We got like all of these effects going on. You can actually see like all the lights flicker because we have a layer that's just like light flickering. And then you can see this like effect on the grinder in the center here where like this light is cascading out of it, right? So that's actually an object, not a background asset. That's not a piece of art that I drew. That's something generated by the game. So you can see these little white pulsing things. Those are hidden objects that the player can't see that are creating particle effects. So if I go back to the objects, here's a for instance, Bone Smoke 2. That's one of those two objects. And on the create event of Bone Smoke 2, it has all this code for creating a particle system and generating the effects that come out of it, and then setting a rule that, well, once this object is created, just cascade that effect constantly until this object is destroyed. So that's how those effects are generated. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Sorry, we had to kind of run through that last bit a little faster, but ultimately, really when you're adding art to the game, if it's not animations or player characters and it's just like a background like this, it is actually pretty fast. It's just like, guessing and checking and making sure everything fits in the right place and then testing what you like. Oh, I forgot to mention, we also got these neat little eyeballs that like blink ominously at you inside of the machine. We added that kind of later into the process. Anyways, yeah, so that's basically the gist of how adding something to the game goes. You start from create your idea, you work on it, and then you kind of flesh it out and develop it, and then you got to take the time to actually implement it. If I were doing like a series of videos or something, I would actually start talking about like creating objects and making logic at this point, because like this is just a background, it doesn't do anything. But we'll leave it at that for today. So before we wrap up and just kind of give you links to if you want to follow us or keep up with our projects or anything, I'll take like maybe 2 or 3 more questions and then we'll close it up.
Jace, we're pretty much at the end there. I'll give you a couple of questions that were asked here. I think the one that came up a couple times, this just happened, was series, please. So I think everyone wants you to talk more, make some more videos, because it's pretty.
I've been meaning to get into streaming for a long time, so I would take that to heart, and I'll certainly consider it. Yeah.
Okay, so Chunky Corey 69 actually asked about a level editor in the game, like build your own level.
Yeah, I don't think that's within the scope of Hellions, but it's not necessarily impossible. You basically have to make level objects, like, I was talking about all those objects and stuff. You have to make objects that make it so you can create levels, which is like very complicated, but it's not impossible. That might be one of those things that's like, depending on the success of Hellions, maybe in the future, but not upon release. That's kind of outside the scope of what I can deliver on the first go, but I'll keep it in mind. Do you have any more questions, Devin?
Sellercast says, so if I'm in high school going into college and I want to make games, aside from playing them, where should I go?
That is an awesome question, and I'll be concise with this. Lots of people will give you different answers to this question, and some of them will work for you and some of them won't. That's just life, really. Like, you got to find what works for you. Part of why I like using GameMaker is because it makes sense to me. It's not the best game engine in the world. It's not easy for everybody, but it makes sense to me, and that's why it works for me. So when it comes to deciding or trying to find your way as to how to get into this stuff, the first thing I would say is just like, you got to go down a path that makes sense to you. Does that mean school? Maybe. Does that mean not school? Also maybe. I did not go to school for game dev. I went to school for all sorts of other stuff, and all of that informed how I create my work. So really, learning is all you need to do. In terms of actionable things, like what do I actually do, I cannot recommend any more to just try to make something. Just try to make something. Just download a free game dev engine and start fooling around with it. Because as soon as you start fooling around with it, you'll start asking questions, and then as soon as you start asking questions, you'll start getting answers. And you'll start finding out what you like doing. Maybe you don't even like coding. Maybe you'll need a coder to work with or whatever. Little Hellions started as a game jam game for Global Game Jam in 2015. So like, go to game jams, do it. It's an excellent way to meet people who do things that you don't know how to do, and they can teach you like the basics, or teach you about things that you want to learn about that you don't know great about, and vice versa. Maybe you're an artist but you don't know how to program, and you get to work with a programmer for a weekend, and then you make some cool little game. Like, that's exactly how Little Hellions started. I got the whole idea for the project in that jam, and I just came out of the jam, and I asked my team, like, hey, can I go on and make this project? And they're like, yeah. So like, that's what you got to do. You got to go to game jams. You got to go to game jams, and you got to just try to make a thing, even if it sucks, because you're only going to learn from making garbage. So yeah. Do you think that's it for questions, or at least what we have time for, Devin?
Yeah, we're out of time, but maybe you can
Okay.
just kind of mention, just where to find you. I'll post that in the Twitch chat there too.
Yeah, if you want to find us, I don't stream currently. This is actually my first stream, but I'm certainly thinking about doing it. If you want to follow Little Hellions on socials or something, though, if you just type !Jace, Jace, into chat, you'll get all of my socials. That being the Little Hellions Twitter account, which is little_Hellions. We also have the Schadenfreude website. That's my company, which is schadenfreude.studio. Good luck spelling that. I would just recommend using the Twitch shortcut. And then we're also on Instagram at Schadenfreude Studio, one word. We also have a Discord for Little Hellions where we talk about game dev, and we talk about just like, I just show little snippets of, like, say, making this background. That's free and open to anyone. If you go to the Little Hellions Twitter, you can find it somewhere on there. And it's been kind of quiet lately just because how crazy this year has been. But we're going to try to be posting more stuff on there. As for Violet Games, that's whole Devin's side of the thing as my publisher. Do you want to talk about the links for Violet Games, Devin?
Yeah, you know what? We'll leave it at that. Our side doesn't matter. We'll wrap up here. We'll post the links in the channel there. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Jace, that was awesome.
Okay, cool. Yeah, all right. Okay, well, thanks for watching, guys. We gotta go. We ran over time, so
see you later.